said, like, let's jump right in and just start with, what's your name, your organization, and your role within that organization.
So I am Tieal Bishop. I am the Chief Executive Officer at A Rosie Place for Children. I like to say I am the visioneering expert. I don't even know if that's a word, but I like to make up things that are more fun.
It is now. It's a word now.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I think, our organization, it's obviously, right, a non-for-profit. We've been around about 15 years. I've been there since the beginning, was one of the founding members. And we serve medically fragile children in all 92 counties of Indiana. And what is a medically fragile child? Real quick, that is a child that has a medical component to just their everyday living. So some type of piece of equipment or medication, something like that, because there's really no services for those children outside of a Rosie Place at this point in Indiana that's not sort of long-term care institutionalization type. And we certainly don't want to do that. We want to come alongside parents and be their advocate. So that's what we do. That's what we've been doing for the last 15 years. And fortunately, we're still here doing it. So
give us some insight as to what the biggest challenges your organization has faced during this time look like.
I think that the theme for me, and I'm sure many, if I could identify one thing, it would be uncertainty, right? That's the word. And that has still not left our world. In the beginning, it was really, what are we going to do? What does this look like for us as an organization? What are we willing to step up and look at in a really strategic way? What are we willing to not do? Sort of, you really have to ask yourself, right? Why are we here and what are we doing? And so I remember the first thing that, we had our team on site there at A Rosie Place, and we made the decision to close the doors for 30 days. So we were actually closed for 31 days only during the pandemic. And again, right, we're healthcare, pediatrics, they're already sort of critically ill consistently throughout their life, these children. So obviously this was a really big deal. But what we quickly realized was this is sort of the life of parents who have a fragile child or a child with significant disabilities in some fashion. So we realized very quickly the answer for us was not to close. It was a good idea for those first sort of 30 days to say, what's the plan? What are we, now going to provide? What are we doing while we're closed for that 30 days? And what are we preparing for? So it all came back to, right, we really do not know what we're preparing for. We don't know what this is going to look like. So we would make plans, next week we're going to do X and Y. And by that next week, you couldn't do X and Y, right? So it just consistently changed. But I think what we became really good at was, okay, how do we dig in and get busy regardless if that changes in 7 days, 14 days, 30 days? How can we begin to look out and say, no matter what we can't control, let's look at what we can control. And so my first directive within that first week of closing down, we all got home, got into our offices and got situated. It became, we have had so much love and support here in St. Joseph County and Elkhart County, all those close top Michiana area in northern Indiana. I just said, it's time for us to literally, how do we love on people back? We have done so well within our organization, and our community has responded so significantly to these children and our mission. So we really looked at, okay, what resources do we have and how do we do that? What does that look like? So next 30 days, that was our goal, was how do we love back? So we had extra masks, we had extra gowns, all the things that everybody was fearful of running out of. And we delivered those to, the local hospitals. We contacted families. We made over, I think it was like 480 phone calls in those 30 days to families consistently a few times a week to say, how are you doing? What do you need? What are you unsure about? And we're here, right? So we had built these relationships, and I really felt just strongly about we need to maintain that contact regardless of what service we provide, what we don't provide. It's the relationship that we have with them that's most critical at this time. And so we were able to do that. We ended up having a drive-through drop off of medical equipment that they did not need, and a pickup of what they did need.
Oh,
So
wow.
and masks and the whole 9 yards, but it ended up to be like a really critical thing for a lot of families. We began to deliver groceries. We delivered flowers and candy when we knew it was somebody's birthday, you know, like a mom or a dad or a sister or something like that. We knew that we wouldn't be able to have our annual birthday party for the kids. And we said, well, that's not cool, right? Because a lot of kids don't, you know, they don't have a lot of friends outside of their family members. So we always have an annual birthday party where they all come together, they all get a cake, they all get sung happy birthday, presents, the whole 9 yards. And we do that typically in March. So clearly we couldn't do that. So we just ended up delivering a package, kind of a care package to every child, and sort of saying, you know, like, this is your birthday present. So that was super fun. And I think it energized our staff in a way, you know, it made them sort of step out of their comfort zone of exactly what you do in your role.
Yeah.
And say, really expand that. What do you want to do? How can you love on them better? And boy, did our clinical staff really respond. We started doing, we do something called respite care, which is allowing families a periodic break of caring for this fragile child 24/7, you know, 365 days a year. That's our primary service. And so we really said, okay, let's look at that. Let's see how can we expand that. And so what we realized in talking with those families through all those phone calls was the kids really missed the connection with a Rosie place. They really missed the nurses. So we just started doing this virtual respite, right? Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? It doesn't even sound, but we actually had the state of Indiana call us and say, you know, is this something you can do? Is this, you know, how are you staying connected? And so we developed a service. And I think that's one thing I would say our success is because we weren't afraid to try it, even if it ended up to be a waste of time, because a lot of things we did, and I know, I'm sure most people would agree, in those first 90 days, a lot of things we did ended up to be sort of a waste of time. It wasn't really time to be productive. It was a time to figure it out.
Yeah.
Being willing to look at how are we doing things? How can we do it differently? And it may last, you know, 30 days. It may last like some things, right? This entire year, we're still doing some of the things that we were doing initially, even today, because they work and because it's working for the family. And that's what we're about, is really trying to, where do we meet people where they're at? And so I'm sure in other people's missions, it's the same thing, right? How do we continue to do our mission? Is that possible? And I, you know, I'm a anything is possible kind of person. So I don't think anybody I could talk to in a non-for-profit could tell me, well, we really can't do that because that's not possible. Oh, I don't know about that. They should. Because I do believe that you can make those things happen, especially if you have a leadership role within the organization and you can sort of make some of those calls. And so we reached out to donors. We just, you know, all the things that I think people have learned over this last year, we certainly did all of those. And, you know, humbly, I say we had one of the best years we've ever had was this
Wow.
year during a pandemic. Yeah,
That's awesome.
and we've raised more money every year that we've been open, and that's always my goal. Our board always says, you know, what's your financial plan? What's your goal? To raise more money than we did the year before. And that's, they kind of laugh at me. I mean, they make me dial it in, but that's in general. And we did that because we just weren't afraid to do the things that we felt would really push and show and highlight the care that we have for those who have invested in us, and utilizing those resources that they have provided us in a really fiscally responsible and transparent way. And that has come back to us twofold.
You know, can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of how you guys sort of just keep the lights on a daily basis? So, you know, are you primarily a grant-driven organization, fundraising, private gifts? Like, what are you looking at, and sort of how was that aspect of what you do impacted by the pandemic?
So I'm a big believer in not sort of one or another. I think most people that are running organizations really are looking at and they should be, right? There's a lot of avenues to development. It's my goal, just straight out, is 50% government funding for the services that we provide, which we actually have to kind of go after and educate our state because we're a little ahead of our time when it comes to caring for fragile children. You know, children weren't surviving these specific illnesses even 15, 20 years ago. So it's kind of a new population and a new sort of a new idea of how do we care for them. So educating is a big piece of our state. And so ideally it would be 50% government funding and 50% philanthropy. So that we're never really too reliant on one or the other. As we know, right, things change. And so if government funding gets cut off, then we're not down and out. And
Right.
it's a hard, tough year financially for people all the way around. Again, we're not down and out. So it's a real intentional way. Now, how do you break down the philanthropy? Right now, we're only about 70 to 65% philanthropy. So we have a little bit of work to do on the government side. But okay, so philanthropy, that is grant writing, events in a different way, potentially, if those make sense for the organization. Donor retention is absolutely, I think, maybe one of the highest things on my list. And again, that falls into, right, our logic of we need to show donors and love on donors like they have us, right? We need to show them what we're doing with those gifts that they give us and make sure we're being very responsible with those, especially at a time like this. You look at even right outside events, how can people help you? Because right, a lot of people have jumped in and said, man, non-for-profits, you know, they needed us before, you know, certainly they're going to need us now. And so I think we're starting to see anyway, the community really responding to that, at least within our organization. How do we raise money for this cause? So they're starting to do some things which we call third-party events outside of the organization, and then how can we help facilitate those?
Oh,
So
interesting.
there's sort of a variety of ways that you're going to end up bringing some of that funding into your mission.
Gotcha. So in those third party events, you've got people saying, "Hey, we want to raise money for you," and you're
Yes.
empowering them to do that. That's really cool. That's super
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So you know, with that, I know, you know, I'll put air quotes around the end, but with the end of the pandemic, you know,
Right.
theoretically drawing near with vaccinations and, you know, a lot of
Yeah.
the efforts that have been going on over the last year kind of coming to fruition, you know, or at least some sense of change visible on the horizon, you know,
Sure.
how are you guys, is there anything specific you guys are thinking about or preparing your organization for as that approaches?
I'm typically pretty conservative when it comes to, you know, planning, spending, the budget. What does that look like this year? We had such an extraordinary year last year that it still just blows my mind. So I'm always prepared for what happens if we don't have that, you know, at some point, right, the bottom's going to fall out, or how can I prepare so that never happens? And, you know, you're just always trying to think ahead a little bit and what's the next idea or what's the next thing. And that's part of that visioneering, right, that I love to do. So again, I think it's one, it's not being afraid to try something new and different. Real quick, like for this year's annual event. So last year, to put it in context, our event is in February, our largest annual fundraising event, the Sweethearts Ball, which you're very familiar with because
Yep.
GiveGrove does that for us. Obviously, right, we could not have that this year coming up, right? We were still too uncertain. It was in February, so just a month ago. So I really started looking at, you know, how are we going to do this differently? And I think, again, it came back to our philosophy of why don't we just be real honest and transparent? One, we cannot have the event, and we all kind of know why, right? Two, I'm not, as a donor, right, or an interested party, I'm not going to make you sit on a recorded 1 hour event, right? Because I tried to do those for the organizations that I love in this community, and I couldn't make it through the whole thing. So why would I ask someone else to do that? So then it was kind of like, okay, could we be bold enough? And it was, I mean, it was scary. I won't lie. Like are we really going to be able to do this? But I thought, honesty has always done us really well. And so we literally just called people and said, we can't have the event. What we're asking you to do is the same gift that you did last year or that you would have done this year had we had it, except no event, straight up. And we had a remarkable response. So I think you have to, again, going back to your question, you have to not be afraid to do something different, try different things. You, as an organization, should know your people, right, and your mission the best. And how do they respond? What is it, the things that you've been successful at? And then how do you take those and apply it moving forward? So, again, I think this year we have as much work to do as we did last year, maybe even more. We were able to serve still over 265 children overnight for our sleepovers and respite, even during a pandemic, right? Which I think is pretty remarkable. And that was because of the event and the success that we had in 2020 before everything shut down. So this year in 2021 for that event, we raised almost the same amount with no event. So our plans for serving children and families look pretty good, right? So far, so good. But then making strategies that we feel like we're really going to need to look at how are we doing this? How are we doing future events? I think people miss people, Alex. I think they do want to get together. Of course, there's some that aren't comfortable. And if you're not comfortable, then, don't participate. That's completely fine. But I think there's people that are ready. So I see us moving forward in the events that we've always had, maybe a little bit differently, maybe a little more outdoors, which I would always prefer. So I think, again, just really looking at, and then, another avenue is grants, and how are we explaining our story, and how are we saying what we're doing? Because what we were always doing before, we can't just pretend and say we're still doing that same exact thing, right? It doesn't really work that way. So really thinking through your strategy on what you're doing and being able to really articulate that and help people visualize what it is that they could potentially be passionate about. Like, how do you tell that story? It's all about that. Showing them and demonstrating your mission in a really clear way.
Yeah.
All of those things take time with your team, strategy, communication stuff, marketing stuff. We're starting to see, I'm sure you've seen, right, the changes on Facebook. I don't know, my opinion is, well, if you're going to do that to the whole non-for-profit sector, right, if we're going to start charging for, go to this website and leaving traffic, which I get, although the bazillion dollars that they've already made, you would think would be significant enough to not do that, but that's not going to happen. So now we just had a meeting yesterday. How are we reinventing where we're bringing people and where we're highlighting what we're doing? And I think that's going to become something that's real significant for those people in profit or nonprofit business. I mean, you're going to end up seeing the same thing, and you're going to have to look at, is this advertising on Facebook really worth the return on that investment? Or do we go back to, it seems kind of old school, right? Websites used to just be a place to house information, but maybe they're going to become a new thing.
Yeah.
Or new reinvented thing, maybe I would say. So you really have to just kind of keep looking ahead on how are we going to manage all of these changes. And nobody really knows, right? There's no magic recipe. I think it's just a tenacity to say, I'm not going to fail. I'm going to succeed. I'm going to make sure we do whatever we need to do, be responsible while we do it, take some risks. All good entrepreneurial thinkers take risks. You would know this, as would I. And hey, look it. We're some proof that's a worthy position to take. So I think we have to do that. I think we have to have more of that spirit. Sometimes being too cautious just sort of hinders that growth. So we were in a strong enough position, I think, as an organization to feel really confident in moving forward last year, moving forward this year. Not that it doesn't have its challenges. It does for us too, no doubt. We just have to figure out different ways of doing things.
You as a leader of an organization, if you could put one question out there to the world, to the other folks who might be watching this, right now, what do you think that question would be? What would you want to know?
Ooh. That's a hard one.
I know.
I think we're all so unique. And that's what's hard about, talking on these platforms. We can say like this, and this, but it looks so different for everyone, based on their abilities, based on their, how long have they been in existence. And so it's really hard to say sort of one question or another. I think some of our counterparts across the country that we stay in contact with, I belong to something called a Like House Coalition, and there's about 35 to 40 of us in different phases of a Rosie place, I'd like to say. And so we're all focused on different things. And again, I think what I keep finding is our uniqueness at a Rosie Place for Children, even in that platform, lends different conversation, different questions. Most of those organizations are focused on the hospice side of palliative care. We're more focused on, let's celebrate this child in their life now. What can they do? How do we say yes? And really look at how do we expand upon their life and the services that we provide them. How can we meet parents where they're at? What can we provide that's most helpful? And yet I find in that coalition group, it's sort of like, like there's a little bit of the, well, we mostly do, hospice. And so my questions are very different. But I feel like they're pertinent, right? Because it's the same type of group. One of the things we've said that we always say, right, is what's working for you? What's not working for you? I think the more that an organization can share and are willing to share, you know me, right? I'm always willing to help and share. I just feel like it's sort of our social responsibility to build each other up. It's not a competition. It's how do we elevate everybody in the charge that they've been charged with, right?
Yeah.
So I look at it like every opportunity I have to talk to another CEO or a leader of a company across our nation, I always say, or I always ask, what is the top one or two things that's working and what was a disaster? And so usually people are pretty willing to talk about what those things are, if they sort of have that spirit of, really want to help other people doing the good work that they're doing. So I think, I know it's very general, but I think it's been probably fundamentally the best question I could have asked. What do we know now? I'm a big person on this. What do we know now today that we did not know a year ago? And how do we make that applicable in a year from now? Whether it is or whether it isn't, we can't predict the future, but what do we need to look at that worked a year ago that's working now that could potentially work a year from now? So I think those are sort of some critical questions that we need to ask ourselves and that we could ask others. We've all done different stuff, right? Not everybody's going to do it the way, a Rosie Place has done it. So even a profit business, right? Profit, nonprofit, a lot of people think nonprofit is so different than a profit business. It's really not. It's the same. It's a business. You're still operating off of a budget. You still have a revenue. You still have all of those strategies that you need to think of, create, implement. So it's not real different in practice. Just for some reason, it always feels different, right?
Yeah.
Like the nonprofit world is sort of the beggars of the world, right?
Yeah.
And I just choose to not look at it like that. So I talk to businesses all across the country on different things that they've done. And I do think, I would say to you, Alex, what has worked the best, right? What has worked the best for you in this last year? What's something that you went, we did this and amen, it rocked.
Yeah.
So that feedback, right, will help people.
Yeah, I think, maybe folks wherever they're watching this can write in the comments what's worked for them and what hasn't, and just share that feedback. But I do want to hop back a second. I really dislike when people sort of draw that, differentiating line between for-profit businesses and nonprofit businesses. I think obviously we created a whole company around helping nonprofits, and really, I think oftentimes being a leader of a nonprofit can be much harder than being a leader of a for-profit, because sometimes your mission and where you produce your revenue are two vastly different places. And so, you've got to kind of keep those things separate in your mind. And, it doesn't matter whether you're for-profit or nonprofit. Either way, you got to keep the lights on, and you got to keep paying your employees or paying your team or paying yourself. So, it all boils down to the same things. But yeah, no, that was really cool. I like that. That was great. So what's working and what's not?
Yeah.
You know, as we're kind of nearing the end of our time here, can you share maybe your best tip for making the world a little brighter for your team, the people your organization serves? You know, what's your best tip for making the world a little bit brighter during this time?
Oh, wow. Well, you know, it's funny. I kind of opened with this because, again, I just believe it. How can we love on others better? Right? We were okay at it before, maybe, right? If we cared about that at all, which I think most good leaders, right, would say, you know, my most valuable resource, right, are people.
Yeah.
It's facts. And so I looked at that like this is a great opportunity to do just that. How do we love on them better, and what does that look like? So we sort of did a bunch of kind of different things, but I made sure that I got our board of directors involved. You know, I always like to say I have no boss, and yet I have 12 bosses all at the same time. But what I said to them was, you know, we're not really different. We are frontline heroes as well, and we need to be acknowledged as that, even though we're not taking care, right, of those patients that have COVID, right? So it's a little bit different, but our families sort of are in crisis often, right? Most of the people that have a mission-based non-for-profit, right, they're addressing a social concern that is at risk in some way. So I look at that as, okay, so as a non-for-profit still functioning during a pandemic, guess what? We are the heroes to those people that are receiving those services or gifts from that mission. So let's turn that around and let's really look at how do we value those people. So, you know, we did some, you know, I don't want to say minuscule, but you know, like we got them special T-shirts, and you know, we distributed some gift cards that would just help their family because they were serving families of fragile children while leaving their own family at home to deal with online learning. And so when you really start looking at your organization as a whole, how do we love the people that are involved better? What does that look like? So whether it's words of encouragement, whether it's gifts, whether it's acknowledgement, sometimes it's just flat out acknowledgement. Celebrating, it's one thing, right? I have not been really good at in my 14 years, and I admit it. I'm not good at stopping and celebrating all that's great because I'm always looking to the next thing, like, oh, awesome. Now, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And that hinders sort of that philosophy of how do we love others, how do we celebrate you and what you've done. So I think that's where we can make a difference, right? How do we make people smile? How do we show others, right, and inspire others? It's by doing, right, doing what you can in your everyday, daily, period, right? How do we do it? We do it one moment at a time, one experience at a time. You know, walking into the gas station and the guy, you know, he's going to pay for your, or you're paying for your Gatorade, right? Hey, how are you doing? You know, have a really great day. I've had people stop and go, thank you. Like, that was really nice. And I'm thinking, man, like, great, but doesn't that kind of stinks, right? We're in a world where, hey, how are you? And have a great day is significant. So that tells us, right? We have some work to do in our own groups and in the world in general, just in our everyday. So I think that's where we make the difference the most, is in our everyday.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I just read somewhere about how people are really it's hard for people to give positive feedback to others, just because like they always feel so awkward doing it. But this study actually proved that even an awkward delivery of positive feedback far outweighs not saying anything at all. So I think
Absolutely.
that just that, hey, how are you? And have a great day. And from a sincere place, I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And we can all do that, right? I mean, it might be a little uncomfortable, not as uncomfortable as, you know, people like me, but I still think, right, it can be so, I guess, inspiring, addicting in a really good way for a change. You know, there's just some good stuff that can happen from it.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tieal. Kind of to wrap this up, can you tell us, just give us, what's the best way for people to find you to donate or to support your mission? Where do they go to learn more about A Rosie Place and help you guys out?
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. I appreciate that. You can always find us. It's a Rosie Place for Children. So we have a Facebook page. We have a website, arosieplace.org. It's AROSIEPLACE. We have a YouTube channel, right, with a bazillion videos now. You can type in a Rosie Place and see what we actually do there. There's always ways to give. I would say our website is probably the easiest and best. You can find me on that website. People can call and ask questions anytime. My phone number is right on there. So yes, that would be wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you guys for all you do. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Tieal.